Hello, welcome to Axiom Flux News on the 17th of March 2015. With myself, PJ. The first article is the one from the Breitbart.com. When our army may be cut to 50,000, the smell of treason is becoming offensive. It beggars belief, or would do, if we were not so inured to our leaders' betrayal of Britain, that a self-styled, Conservative-led government is planning to cut our armed forces even further. But any sane rationale, the most urgent task facing a responsible British government today should be to take radical measures to reverse the relentless decline in the scale of our armed forces after the devastation wrought by successive defence reviews in the past 2 decades. Instead, a report by the Royal United Services Institute has suggested defence spending could be cut by a further 10% during the next Parliament. In practical terms, that would mean the regular army, currently being reduced from 102,000 to a desperately inadequate 82,000, would lose a further 40% of manpower and would amount to around 50,000. That would represent the British Army's lowest strength in almost 250 years, a quarter of a millennium. Yet Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond, while claiming on the Andrew Marr show that Dave did not want to preside over any further cuts in the armed forces, refused 10 times to guarantee that there will not be further reductions in military spending. He claimed a final decision would not be made until after the general election. Well, of course, it wouldn't be. The Tories don't want to tell the electorate, although they should, that they intend to dismantle what little remains of this nation's defences and risk losing votes. All major policy decisions that are monstrously opposed to the national interest are nowadays postponed until after the voters have been conned. The government then claims a mandate for whatever it wants to do, often by consensus of all three legacy parties, and democracy is further subverted. The current defence budget is 36 billion, or 2% of the GDP. And Dave is exhorting other NATO members to commit that percentage to military spending, even though Britain's budget is forecast to fall to 1.7% of GDP by the year 2020. In contrast, the welfare budget, at a time of falling unemployment, is 110 billion. The Tories refuse to guarantee the ring-fencing of defence spending after 2016. Even though Britain's overseas aid budget was increased by a whacking 30% last year, stands at more than £12 billion and has just been guaranteed by new legislation at 0.7% of GDP. This is insane. The British people will not grudge a reasonable foreign aid contribution if it were helping really poor people. Instead, it has funded India's space program and other indefensible beneficiaries. Department for International Development program that was supposed to create 29,000 jobs in Sierra Leone by this year has created just 16. Meanwhile, our defences are in tatters. We do not even have an aircraft carrier in service, which makes many overseas operations impractical. Yet, when retired senior officers of the armed forces recently spoke out about Britain's vulnerability, Dave rounded on them waspishly, accusing them of having books to sell. Someone should tell Cameron it is less reprehensible to market a book than to sell one's country down the river. The striking phenomenon of the past 2 decades has been that, as Britain has stripped away its military capability, it has engaged in even more conflicts. These, in turn, have exposed us to increasing danger as the Incompetence in Westminster, Brussels and Washington have systematically removed all the strongmen such as Saddam and Gaddafi who were keeping the jihadist genie in the bottle. Normally when a nation engages in aggressive wars, it expands its armed forces, but Britain has been throwing her weight about while going on a crash diet. There is clearly a hidden agenda, less hidden since Jean-Claude Juncker recently called for the creation of an EU army, on the hilarious grounds that it would show Russia that we are serious when it comes to defending the values of the European Union. What values is the question there. EU values are graft, freeloading, corruption, destruction of national sovereignties, caricature bureaucracy, and aggressive imposition of politically correct anti-Christian initiates, whatever it is, or inities. The emergence of a European army would rock the Kremlin. With laughter, it was the Brussels idiots, always so keen to claim the EU has prevented European war since 1945, that provoked the Ukraine conflict. Now they want an army to pursue further mischief. If the Belgian, French and Dutch components perform as well as they did in 1940, our security would be less than assured. But the political class would welcome a European army, as it would offer a pretext for further UK defence cuts. Behind this farce lurks potentially tragedy. Without adequate security, which is inadequate, the minute, and any country is at risk of annihilation, or at least humiliation. The political class has done this grave harm to Britain. For centuries, traitors were hanged, drawn and quartered at Tyburn, who had done less material damage to this country than politicians have done today. Undermining the defence of the realm is treason. The stench of it is emanating from every aperture in the Palace of Westminster. That brings me to my next article, because we don't have these guys fighting off the ISIS crisis threat anymore. We've got these guys. Stick to it. There you go. 4 more British Army soldiers going to fight ISIS in Syria in international volunteer force. So the group said ISIS must be defeated for freedom and democracy. A team of 4 more British Army soldiers are reportedly preparing to leave the UK to fight ISIS in Syria. Ex-servicemen have formed what they call IVF or I4 or IF4, which are they're pronouncing their name yet, but we'll find out more about them. And they have bought combat fatigues and high-powered assault rifles to prepare for this mission. One member told the newspaper the unit was open to English-speaking volunteers from any country and will be in Syria within weeks after honing their skills with daily training. Although we wear a similar uniform to UK armed forces, we have no association to them other than the fact that we are ex-armed forces, he added. We will deploy strong force to aid the Kurdish militias. We intend to work as one effective. Rather than split or tag onto other militia units, we intend to be a serious asset. The former soldier did not release his identity or that of his comrades because of fears they would be prevented from travelling to Syria. Claiming the British government, which is part of a US-led coalition carrying out airstrikes against ISIS and training Kurdish and Iraqi soldiers, was not doing enough to fight the so-called Islamic State. He said it must be defeated in the name of freedom and democracy. 200 Western fighters from Britain, The US, Australia, and Europe are believed to have travelled to battle ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Earlier this month, Konstantinos Eric Schofield became the first UK citizen to be killed fighting the Islamist group. 25-year-old former Royal Marine from Barnsley is believed to have died from a mortar wound while fighting militants in the frontline village of Tek Kuzela in Syria. His family paid tribute to their son, saying, "His flame might have burned briefly, but it burned brightly with love, courage, conviction, and honour." Mr. Schofield is believed to have been recruited by a group called the Lions of Rojava, arriving at their Syrian base in December, where they met other foreign fighters. Other Britons believed to be fighting ISIS include 28-year-old Mesa Gifford and former bouncer Tim Locks from Staines. The Home Office warned that anyone who travels abroad in order to join conflicts may be prosecuted, whatever side they are fighting on. The UK advises against all travel to Syria and parts of Iraq. Anyone who does travel to these areas for whatever reason is putting themselves in considerable danger. The best way to help the people of these countries is to donate to registered charities that have ongoing relief operations, not by taking part in a conflict overseas, which can be an offence under both criminal and terror laws. An 18-year-old man suspected of planning to travel to join ISIS in Syria was arrested in Birmingham today, hours after 3 other British teens detained in Turkey were released on bail. The arrests are signs of increasingly strenuous efforts by police to stop the flow of radicalised young Britons to the Middle East. Security agencies have been criticised for failing to prevent 3 London girls from making the same journey last month. So as the armed forces is in talks of being crushed to 50,000, and the smell of treason lingers in the air, that becomes offensive after a period of time. We've got former British Army soldiers teaming up and going to fight ISIS in Syria for their freedom and democracy. There you go. So moving on, while some judges sleep, some are getting sacked. And what for? Well, for watching porn. 3 judges have been sacked for viewing pornographic material via their official IT accounts, the Judicial Conduct Investigations Office has said. The pornography was not illegal in content, the spokesman added. However, the Lord Chancellor and the Lord Chief Justice concluded it was an inexcusable misuse of their official accounts and wholly unacceptable conduct for a judicial office holder. A 4th judge resigned before the official inquiry had concluded. District Judge Timothy Bowles, Immigration Judge Warren Grant, Deputy District Judge and Recorder Peter Bullock have been removed from office. The 3 judges were not linked in any way. 4th Judge Recorder Andrew Moore was also found to have viewed similar inappropriate material via his judicial IT account. Judge Moore worked at Lincoln County Court, District Judge Bowles at Romford County Court, and Judge Bullock on the North Eastern Circuit, and Judge Grant at the Immigration and Asylum Chamber, based at Taylor House in London. So the analysis from Clive Coleman, BBC legal correspondent. Today's announcement is unprecedented. It is exceptionally rare for a judge to be removed from office. For 3 judges, albeit pretty junior ones, to be sacked at the same time represents a serious blow to the reputation of the judiciary. However, there is no suggestion that any of the sacked judges did anything illegal in accessing pornographic images via their judicial computers. Had they done the same thing at home, there would have been little basis for dismissing them. It's purely a question of misconduct and the misuse of judicial IT accounts paid for by the taxpayer. Should any of the three wish to challenge their dismissal, it would open up the interesting prospect of a former judge bringing a judicial review of the decision to remove them as a judge, which itself would be heard by a judge. So, a question of conduct. The Lord Chancellor and the Lord Chief Justice would have removed Recorder Moore had he not resigned before the conclusion of the disciplinary process. It is a question of whether or not the judiciary system is being drawn into disrepute, he said. He added, there is no suggestion at all that the judges have done anything illegal. It is a question of conduct. He said the Judicial Conduct Investigations Office carefully monitors judicial conduct. The spokesman for the JCIO would not comment on what led to the inquiry or whether the judges' contracts includes any clauses on the use of their official IT accounts. The spokesman told the BBC that though the judges would no longer be allowed to work in a judicial role, they can still pursue other work. He said, as far as I'm aware, the judges are not appealing the decision. So an undiagnosed depression from the former immigration Judge Warren Grant said he had been suffering from severe and undiagnosed depression at the time of the allegation. Mr. Grant, who now works as an immigration law specialist at a firm of North London solicitors, issued a statement asking for privacy. He said, I do not wish to comment, save to say that for some years before and during the period covered by the conduct which formed the subject of the complaint laid against me, I was suffering from severe and undiagnosed depression. I request that the privacy of my family and myself be respected, so that we are allowed to continue with our lives. Though the JCIO reported today that Recorder Moore resigned ahead of the disciplinary process, a statement from the Courts and Tribunal Judiciary published on the 30th of September last year reported that he had retired. The JCIO spokesman told the BBC he resigned and took his pension. Recorder Moore, 65, when he resigned, was admitted as a solicitor in 1973. He served as a deputy district judge in 83, a district judge in 94, assistant recorder in 96, and a recorder from the year 2000. So, as I said, some judges sleep, and some are getting the sack. Many other judges out there that have, been questionable whether they should have been disciplined for their actions. So the BBC reporting on the most lenient of cases, I guess, with this one being the legal pornography and the question of conduct being looked at. That's as far as the BBC are willing to push this article out. But don't worry, have no fear, as this next article is basically along the same lines. Cyril Smith was not prosecuted for child sex abuse because establishment was scared who he would name in court, detective claims. So, Cyril Smith was not taken to court when paedophilia allegations emerged in the 1960s because of concerns that other high-profile sex offenders would be exposed. A retired detective has claimed. Scotland Yard is already facing allegations of a cover-up after the BBC's Newsnight reported claims that criminal evidence, including photos and videos of men abusing teenage boys, was buried in the 1980s. Smith, a Liberal MP who died in 2010, was taken into custody after police walked into a sex party at a house in London, but released within hours without charge, according to the programme. So we've got a video here to watch in a minute, 3-minute long. Jack Tasker, a retired Lancashire Police Detective Sergeant who carried out the third investigation into Smith in 1969, following to by Rochdale police, told the Sky News the MP may have been exposed several other sex offenders. Mr. Tasker said the investigation into his alleged child abuse at Cambridge House Care Home was stalled because other people were rather worried that if Cyril Smith went before a court, he would open his mouth. The former officer believes that senior officers deliberately prevented a proper investigation and that the Rochdale MP's prosecution may have led to the fall of the government. I think he was guilty, and I think he should have faced trial, he added. I think circumstances since have probably proved I was right. We were probably right. Mr. Tasker interviewed several boys with similar stories of abuse and said that when officers interviewed Smith himself, he appeared to be a very worried man and was sweating profusely. Superiors visited his office demanding he hand over notes and records from the investigation and telling him to take it no further. He told Sky nothing more was heard on that matter. Smith's career was dogged by repeated allegations and investigations spanning decades, but no charges were ever brought. The IPCC yesterday announced it was investigating allegations of corruption inside Scotland Yard, including claims that it covered up child sex abuse by senior officers and MPs. It is looking into 14 referrals with details of alleged corruption in the Metropolitan Police relating to child sex offences from the 1970s to the 2000s. Among them are allegations of child sex abuse against an unnamed senior politician and a subsequent cover-up of his crimes. The Prime Minister is facing calls to guarantee that police and intelligence officers will give evidence over an alleged VIP paedophile ring that existed at the heart of Westminster will not be prosecuted. So, there you go, with a picture there, Dolphin Square. So just before this article carries on, I'm going to go back. I'm going to play the first video here and continue in 3 minutes time. Let's take that back there so we don't miss much.
Apart from the policy changes and the legal changes, is a big change in culture. We need to say loudly and clearly, abuse of children under the age of 16 is wrong. It's not consent. It's not normal relations. It's wrong, and it has to be. We have to be intolerant of it and not walk on by, as happened in too many cases in the past.
Experts have been warning about the scale of child abuse for decades, and you're only doing something now at the very end of your parliament. Have you and other politicians not been willfully ignoring this desperate issue?
No, we have taken action because we put in place tougher sentences. We've put in help for the victims. We've taken all sorts of steps. But what's come out of Rotherham and Rochdale and Oxford has been so horrific that it has demonstrated that more needs to be done. Now, obviously, it's the responsibility of these councils and those police forces and those social services departments, but government needs to bring everyone together and make sure the lessons are being learned and any legal changes that are necessary are passed. So out of today comes help for whistleblowers, help for victims, changes to the law to make sure that willful neglect is made a proper offence.
But this is 5 years on. There was nothing in your manifesto or the coalition agreement that even mentioned child sexual exploitation. It shouldn't have come as a surprise to you.
Well, I don't accept that we haven't done a lot about it. We have. We have put in place better police training. We've put in place longer sentences, more help for victims, a whole set of things. But these events at Rotherham and in Oxford have happened after the last manifesto was written. They've happened during this Parliament. And what I'm determined as Prime Minister is that we end the walk-on-by culture that too many police forces and social work departments have demonstrated.
How will threatening social workers with jail encourage good quality people to give their lives to this profession?
Well, we're doing great work to encourage good people into social work in the first place. So we're having an equivalent of teach first into social work. But at the end of the day, if professionals fail, there need to be consequences. One of the problems in Rotherham is that there was failure after failure by social workers, by counsellors, by council officials, and yes, by the police, and not enough consequences flowed from that. So it's very important the consequences do flow. But in the end, as I've said, all the legal changes we make, all the policy changes we make, all the different practices we put in place, none of that is a substitute for a healthy dose of common sense, rolling up your sleeves, getting stuck in, and putting an end to this abuse.
Finally, on Oxford, no one's been held to account despite systemic problems found by the case review. What's your opinion on that?
Well, we need to look carefully at the report out today, but it's not true. No one's been held to account. There was a court case, and some of the perpetrators were sentenced, and that's the most important sort of accountability of all. What needs to happen now is the lessons need to be learned. There's some evidence that in Oxford that has happened, but I'm sure there's more work to do.
Well, there's definitely more work to do, Mr. Cameron. So let's look at the next one, because the PM urged to protect whistleblowers in abuse cover-up inquiry. Labour MP Tom Watson has urged the Prime Minister to protect police and intelligence officers who give evidence over an alleged VIP paedophile ring into Westminster to guarantee that they will not be prosecuted. It emerged yesterday that Scotland Yard is being investigated over claims that it covered up child sex abuse because of the involvement of influential MPs and police officers. The police should be protected from prosecution in abuse inquiry. David Cameron is facing calls to protect police and intelligence officers who give evidence over an alleged VIP paedophile ring in Westminster to guarantee that they will not be prosecuted. It emerged yesterday that the Scotland Yard is being investigated over claims that it covered up child sex abuse because of the involvement of influential MPs, police officers. The new claims were also made on the BBC's Newnight that officers who arrested Liberal MP Sir Cyril Smith on suspicion of hosting sex parties with teenage boys will want to keep quiet about the investigation or face prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. Tom Watson, the Labour MP, who first made allegations in Parliament about a Westminster paedophile ring in October 2012, today called on David Cameron to shield whistleblowers from that law. He said, "It is now clear that the Prime Minister must guarantee the former police and intelligence officers who wish to help the IPCC with their inquiries will have the threat of the Official Secrets Act lifted." With this new inquiry, it is also clear that the duty of all former police officers, intelligence officers and civil servants who have knowledge of a cover-up to come forward. So there you go. There's the article there, an undercover police operation that gathered evidence of child abuse by Cyril Smith was scrapped after the MP was arrested, the report states. Which brings me to the next short piece here, which is 2 minutes, just over, well, just short of 3 minutes long. So I'll play this one.
All of us have been horrified by the instances of child abuse that have been uncovered and the further allegations that have been made. And all the victims of child abuse are not just owed justice, but are owed an apology that it took so long for their cries to be heard. Does the Prime Minister agree that all inquiries, including by the police and those he has set up, must go wherever the evidence leads them, in whatever institution of the country, including our own, to get at what happened?
I absolutely agree with the right honourable gentleman. Child abuse is a despicable crime, and the victims live with the horror for the rest of their lives. And it's absolutely vital that whether it is the 2 inquiries announced by the Home Secretary, or indeed the vital police inquiries that are being carried out, that no stone is left unturned. I think the horror of the Jimmy Savile and Rolf Harris cases just show what people were able to get away with. It was almost on occasion they were committing crimes in plain sight, and it took far too long to get to the bottom of what happened and for justice to be done. And that is absolutely what this government is committed to achieving.
Does he agree that the review by Peter Wanless cannot be simply a review into the original review, but must seek to discover what happened to the files, who knew what about the files, and whether information was covered up And the Wanless Review must also have full investigative powers.
But what I'd say to him is it's absolutely vital that Peter Wanless, who I think has an excellent record in this regard and will carry out the review in absolutely the right way, that he has all the powers that he needs. And let's be absolutely clear, if he wants more powers, and if that inquiry wants to have a greater powers and ability, it can absolutely ask for it. And as he says, it must go exactly where the evidence leads. We're determined to get to the bottom of what happened.
And can I also ask whether he will consider the very sensible recommendations made today by Peter Wanless around making the covering up of abuse a criminal offence and ensuring that there is an obligation on institutions to report abuse where it occurs?
Should we change the law so that there is a requirement to report and make it a criminal offence not to report? The government is currently looking at that, and of course both reviews will be able to examine this particular point and advise us accordingly. And I think it may well be time to take that sort of step forward. What is vital is that the government learns all the lessons of this review. And where I think the Elizabeth Butler-Sloss review can really help is by having a panel of experts that can advise us about all the things that need to change in all of these institutions. If, for instance, the church, for instance, the BBC, for instance, the NHS, but also, if necessary, in this place and in government too.
So you're looking at the article here. This was the 9th of July 2014, where the Prime Minister said the government is considering changing the law to make it a criminal offence not to report child abuse. So, you know, over a year, or just coming up to a year, under a year then. Brings me into, no, not that one, this one. This one was pointed out by the UK column, and they said in this article, they showed the Telegraph article from going back now, where the Prime Minister sounded a warning as he was handed a list by Philip Schofield of suspected paedophiles on ITV's This Morning programme, for those that remember it. Cameron said, anyone who has any information about anyone who is a paedophile, no matter how high up in British society they are, that is what the police are for. We are a civilised, democratic country under the rule of law, with a police force with a justice system. If there is any evidence that investigations were not conducted properly or inquiries were held that didn't get to the bottom of things, then government has to act, and that is exactly what we have done in relation to the North Wales investigation. So there's the words from Cameron. If you are a whistleblower, he's promised to protect those, unless your name is, of course, Melanie Shaw, Ben Fellows, other people like Robert, and many others as well. Probably more to come in the future, who aren't getting the protection that they were promised that they would receive. So what's happening, Cameron? When you're going to do something about this child abuse, and will it be done before the general election, or are you going to sit it out and wait until afterwards, where you probably won't be here, not in power, as you told us to kick you out by 2015 if we wasn't happy? So let's wait and see for May and find out the result on that. Russell Brand, in my final article, and Iain Duncan Smith become unlikely allies, according to The Independent by Charlie Cooper. A pioneering North London addiction service threatened with closure is being backed by an unlikely pair of advocates. The Work and Pension Secretary, Iain Duncan Smith, and Russell Brand. The 1NE Rehabilitation Centre in Woodford Green is having its council funding cut at the end of this month, after losing its contract to a major national provider. Mr. Duncan Smith has since 2007 been a patron of the centre, which provides abstinence-based help to help people trying to get over drug and alcohol addiction. Meanwhile, Brand, who has attracted the ire of most mainstream politicians for declaring his intention not to vote and advocating revolution, has rallied behind the centre, which provides the same kind of rehabilitation which helped him overcome a heroin addiction. While the two were not formally working together on the campaign, yesterday they both voiced support for 1NE. Since opening nearly 30 years ago, the service had had a very high success rate at 70%. A campaign has been launched to raise $160,000 to fund it for another year. Mr. Duncan Smith, he told The Independent, "It is a brilliant organisation which I've been a supporter of for over a decade. I am visiting this Friday and will do whatever I can to help save the service. I call on the local authority to reconsider their funding decision." Brand said the centre was exactly the kind of place that saved me. Questioned why the government was letting a successful local organisation go to the wall, and urged Mr. Duncan Smith's cabinet colleague, Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt, to intervene immediately to stop this nonsense. Council spokesperson said the new treatment system would increase capacity and improve access to services, although it is regrettable that the 1NE were not successful through the tendering process. Measures were put in place to make sure all service providers were treated fairly and given the opportunity to tender, the spokesperson said. So you probably never see these two having anything in common really, but apparently they do. So, you know, if we can all, I think this just shows if we can all come together with a cause, maybe, you know, the most unlikely things could materialise. And that's all I've got. I thought I'd leave you on that. Other mainstream had put this out as some sort of propaganda, I reckon, but I don't know how to find out and see what Russell Brand's version would be on his truths. If he does decide to talk about it, I'll have a watch out on that and see what he's got to say. But until tomorrow, that's all for the Flux news for today, as I'm going to rest my sore throat. So I did plan to have a rest today and rest my throat and my voice, but I had some interesting articles I wanted to put out, so I did come on. But now I'm going, and I'll try and recover for tomorrow. Until then, take care for yourselves and sleep well. Thank you for watching. Goodbye for now.